The purpose of this Corning training video is to demonstrate the installation of the FuseLite MTP compatible splice-on connector to a 2mm or 3mm round cable. Please remember to follow all proper safety procedures when working with fiber optic cables. The tools needed for this procedure are the cable prep tool, black marking pen, lint-free wipes, 90% or better isopropyl alcohol, and your snips for cutting aramid yarns. We also recommend that you use an industry-approved fiber ribbonizing tool, which could be of your choice. The next piece of equipment that you'll need is the fusion splicer. This is Corning's OptiSplice ribbon fusion splicer. Ensure that you have acquired the proper fiber handlers to perform this operation. The splicer comes equipped with the FBC-012 fiber cleaver along with the OptiSplice thermal stripper. Now let's discuss the key components of the MTP compatible connector. The Corning FuseLite MTP compatible connector comes in a blister pack just like this. I've removed all the components to discuss what each of them are. You have the ferrule subassembly with the factory cleave fibers. This is what's called the dust cap antenna, which will be removed later in the process. Your heat shrink sleeve, the rear housing furcation tube assembly, your inner spring, and then your outer housing. First step is to insert the fiber through the rear housing and furcation tube assembly and slide it out of the way. Next, you're going to make a mark at exactly 130 millimeters from the end of the fiber, which I've already done. Next, with the cable prep tool, using the 2mm slot, we're going to put the mark where the blade is right towards the opening of the tool. So make sure that the cable is nice and straight, gently press down and pull the cable through the tool. So the next step is to separate the fibers from the aramid yarns and then ribbonize the fibers. So now that I have all 12 fibers ribbonized, I'm going to insert the fibers through the spring. Be careful not to de-ribbonize the fibers that you just put together. And now insert the fibers through the heat shrink sleeve. And slide that out of the way. Now you're going to make a mark at 30 millimeters from the end of the fibers, which I've already done. You're going to load the ribbonized fibers in the handler. And make sure that your 30 millimeter mark is flush with the end of the handler. And close the clamp. This is the OptiSplice thermal stripper. I just want to point out a couple features. Your on-off button, heat setting, battery power levels. So the way this is designed is you actuate the trigger mechanism, and that will extend the slide as the ribbon material is stripped off of the fiber. So let's open the stripper. This is the clamp which will hold the holder, and you want to make sure that the end of your ribbon lands within the green zone here. So I will place the handler in place, close the clamp, make sure that it is firmly closed, and then close the thermal lid. Light will blink green, and when it's ready for me to pull the trigger, it'll go to a steady green light, and we've stripped all 12 fibers. So now that I've stripped the fibers, release the clamp on the fiber holder, remove it and set it aside. Reset the slide, and under the thermal stripper you can see the debris from stripping the fibers. Be sure that you remove that accordingly. So next step is clean the fibers. Make sure that you allow the alcohol to dry in the ribbon and make sure that they're all nice and parallel before you put the handler in the cleaver. Now that my fibers are nice and clean and parallel to one another, insert the handler in the FBC-012 cleaver. Make sure that fibers are still nice and straight. Lower the clamp, cleave the fibers, and before releasing the clamp, make sure that you grab the fiber splinters and dispose of them appropriately. Once you've cleaved the fibers, remove them from the cleaver. Inspect the ends of the fiber. Make sure that they're all even length. And place the handler in the fusion splicer. And make sure that you do not make contact with the end faces to any foreign objects. This is the MPO12-Fuse. This is the handler designed for the ferrule subassembly. So I'm going to lay the subassembly into place, securing it with my thumb, and then close the clamp. Once again, making sure you do not make contact with foreign objects with the fiber end faces. Insert the handler. And one last examination to make sure all the fibers are in the V-grooves, and then close the lid. Next step is to ensure we have the proper programming. Now that splice is complete, open the heat shrink lid and clamps. Lower the electrode flat, release the clamp on your ribbonized fibers, then release the clamp on your ferrule assembly end. Now we're going to transition up to the heat shrink oven. So gently work the heat shrink sleeve down into position and center it inside the heat shrink oven, and then close the lid. When you hear the audible alert, raise the heat shrink oven lid and clamps, and notice that the heat shrink sleeve is still hot, so let it cool for a moment before final assembly. Next step is slide the spring up over the heat shrink sleeve into position. Now we're going to separate the boot and furcation tube from the rear housing. Slide it back and slide the rear housing up towards the ferrule subassembly. As you're moving the rear housing up towards the heat shrink sleeve, remove the aramid yarns, pull them back through the rear housing as well as the jacket halves. Slide the rear housing into position, and at this point you want to remove the white ferrule cap. Notice the small window on the ferrule itself. You're going to align that window up with the key on the actual outer housing. So insert into the housing and gently push the two halves together. Okay, now take your dust cap and put that on the end to protect the fibers. Notice the indentions on the rear housing. That's where the jacket halves will rest in the final assembly. If you need to trim the jackets to length, then do so. Gather the aramid yarns and the jacket halves together. Compress them on the rear housing and slide the boot and furcation tube assembly up and start threading it onto the rear housing. This will be the strain relief component for the cable and the connector. If you have any additional aramid yarns protruding from the connector, you can trim those off. And this is your completed Corning FuseLite MTP compatible connector. That's it. If you have any questions or recommendations for videos, call us or send us an email at cablesystems@corning.com. Remember, Corning Cable Systems recommends getting properly trained in fiber optic installation. We offer a series of training classes. Thank you.